My girlfriend has the power to turn back time, but it costs her a day of her life every single time she uses it. She had no idea I knew her secret, or that she'd used it 999 times just to save her childhood friend, even going as far as killing me 99 times in the process. By the 1,000th loop, I finally reached my breaking point. I looked at her and said, "Gray, stop. I get that this is easy for you, but I can't handle instant noodles for breakfast every single day, especially when you don't even leave me a seasoning packet. Even a stray dog wouldn't touch this." I stared down at the bowl of plain, unseasoned noodles sitting on the table while my girlfriend, Gray Miller, was busy in the kitchen fixing a real lunch for her childhood friend, Ben Sullivan. I let out a long sigh and muttered to myself that it looked like we were back to yesterday all over again. This was the 1,000th time I'd lived this day, spanning nearly 3 years of my life, all because Gray was obsessed with saving Ben. He was supposed to die in an accident tonight, and Gray possessed a power beyond human comprehension, the ability to rewind time. Unfortunately, she had failed 999 times to keep Ben alive. There were moments where she even lost her own life trying, but as long as she had a split second before the end, she would trigger the reversal and reset everything to the day before. In the beginning, I tried to intervene quietly because I was terrified of the consequences. Luckily, her actions shifted slightly with every reset, allowing me to test different ways to stop her without her ever suspecting I was the cause. I tried everything from picking fights and faking illnesses to calling the cops, but nothing could keep her from rushing out to save her friend. The darkest moments were when I pushed too hard and she'd snap, stabbing me to death with a kitchen knife and leaving me to bleed out on the floor. Eventually, she decided I was too much of a nuisance to deal with every day, so she started killing me the moment the time reset, just to get me out of the way. By my count, she has murdered me 99 times. She didn't hesitate to end my life because she viewed it as a temporary fix. She knew she could just rewind time, and I'd be standing there again. What she never realized was that while the rest of the world forgot everything, my memory stayed perfectly intact through every single loop. I kept my mouth shut because I was terrified that if she knew I remembered, she'd just kill me every time as a precaution. I had to watch her hold Ben right before his death 999 times, whispering that she would save him no matter what. Then the cycle would start all over again. For 3 long years, I was forced to witness their unbreakable bond, making it feel like they were the true couple while I was just a ghost haunting their love story. I was exhausted and desperate for a new life, anything but repeating this same miserable day. My feelings for Gray had withered away with every reset, so today I decided things were going to be different. Once she finished packing the lunch she'd made for Ben, she walked into the living room and recited the same script I'd heard 1,000 times about having important plans and not coming home. As she turned to leave, she brushed against the water cooler and sent a glass tumbling toward the floor. Before it could shatter, I tossed a sofa cushion with perfect timing to catch it, leaving her staring at me in total shock while I remained silent. I stood up, grabbed her car keys from the stand and an umbrella from the porch, then pressed them into her hands. When she started to ask what I was doing, I cut her off with a faint smile and told her she'd need them for the rain that was coming later. A look of confusion crossed her face as if she wanted to say more, but she simply promised to come home early and cook a real dinner for once. I just nodded and watched her rush out the door, letting out another heavy sigh as the door clicked shut. I hadn't actually checked the weather, but I knew exactly what was going to happen. In every other loop, she never forgot her keys or her umbrella, yet she was so preoccupied with Ben this time that she didn't even realize I was acting out of character. Her mind was always on Ben, making me realize that our entire relationship might have been a mistake from day one. It all started 5 years ago when she used her power to save my life during a college trip to the Snoqualmie River in Washington. A flash flood hit while we were swimming, and a sudden cramp in my leg left me paralyzed in the water while my friends were too far off to hear me. Just as I was slipping under, I saw Gray dive in from the bank and heard her whisper that she would save me, right before the darkness took over. I thought she was just trying to give me hope in my final moments, but then I woke up. Suddenly, I was back at the campus gates with my friends, exactly where we had been before we ever set foot near the water. I was completely disoriented, convinced it had been a nightmare, until Gray stepped into my path with an annoyed look on her face. She stood there with her hands on her hips and told me in no uncertain terms that swimming in the river today was a death wish. My friends were baffled and started arguing with this stranger who was suddenly bossing us around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was the reason I was still breathing. Even though it made no sense, my gut told me that the girl standing in front of me had literally pulled me back from the brink. I convinced everyone to skip the river and grab lunch instead. And that night, the news confirmed my fears when they reported a massive flash flood. It was the moment I realized that my dream had been a very real, very terrifying reality. Gray really did have the power to control time itself. We were at the same university, so I tracked her down that evening to thank her, and she just gave me a knowing smile and told me she always kept her word. I knew exactly what she was implying, even though she thought her secret was safe with her. I fell for her hard and started chasing her, and eventually, we became a couple. I gave her everything I had because I felt like I owed her my life. I was ready to spend the rest of my life with her until Ben Sullivan came back into the picture and ruined everything. They were close, sometimes uncomfortably so, but I chose to trust her anyway. Everything changed the night Ben died in that accident, creating a distance between us that only grew with every reset. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple living a single day, but in reality, we had been trapped in this loop for nearly 1,000 days. During those 1,000 days, I was berated, broken up with, and even murdered by the woman I loved, all for the sake of Ben. My heart had turned to stone long ago. I choked down the same breakfast I'd had 1,000 times, though it had lost all flavor years ago. I went through the motions of cleaning the house before packing up every single thing I owned. The only thing I left behind was a framed photo from our 3rd anniversary, back when she used to look at me with genuine happiness. I still remember her promising me that I'd always be safe as long as she was around. I joked about her being the one to put me in danger, and she just laughed, saying she could always hit the reset button on any mistake she made. She told me that since she saved me once, she could do it for the rest of our lives. I'd held her tight and promised to protect her in return, but looking back, those were just empty words from a version of us that no longer exists. The moment she started killing me to get to Ben, I knew we were over. Her power let her fix her mistakes, but it only worked for the people she actually cared about. If I were anyone else, oblivious to the resets, maybe I'd still be in love with her. But I'm grateful I remember, because otherwise I would have spent my whole life living a lie. I pulled our anniversary photo out, ripped my face out of the frame, and left her half behind as the final sign that I was gone. I lay on the couch one last time, soaking in the silence of the apartment. I couldn't handle another reset, so I decided to help her save Ben myself. She saved my life once, and I was going to settle that debt today so I could finally be free of her. This was my ticket out. A few hours later, I threw my bags in a car and drove over to Ben's office, where I found Gray pacing the sidewalk like a nervous wreck. Ben's phone was off, and he was unreachable, just like every other time. He was driving into a death trap. A bomb was rigged to go off the second he stepped out his car. Gray had tried 1,000 different ways to stop it, and failed every single time. She could never get to him in time, and his death always triggered her to hit the reset button. If she hadn't been so blinded by panic, she might have actually figured out how to save him, but her desperation always got in the way. I guess that's what happens when you're blinded by love. I knew that if I didn't step in, she'd just reset the day at noon again. When I walked up to her, she looked like she'd seen a ghost, her face pale with panic. She stammered, asking what I was doing there. I just handed her a jacket and told her it was going to get cold when the rain started. She took it with a guilty look and muttered a quiet thank you. She was surprised I'd found her, since she never told me where she was going, but she was still too distracted to realize I was acting strange. I just looked at her and asked when we'd become the kind of couple that had to say thank you for basic kindness. She didn't have an answer for that. I ignored her and pulled a heavy box out of my trunk, which immediately caught her attention. I just told her it was a delivery for a friend who worked in the building and left it at that. She was too worried about Ben to care about the box and tried to send me home. I checked my watch and told her I was staying because you never know when things might go sideways. She looked at me with a flicker of surprise, but she didn't argue. Then her cold mask slipped back on, and she snapped at me to leave again. I just leaned against the wall and ignored her. She called me crazy and told me that if anything happened, I was on my own. She kept shouting for a bit before finally giving up. She knew she could just reset the day if I got hurt, so my life didn't really matter to her anymore. As long as she saved Ben, everything else was collateral damage. It was funny how the woman who promised to save me forever was now the one screaming insults at me. She'd already killed me so many times that one more accident wouldn't even make her blink. Soon, The private investigators she'd hired showed up to give her their report. She'd hired them to find out who was targeting Ben, but they never found anything in time. You can't solve a conspiracy in a single afternoon, especially when the crime hasn't even happened yet. I could tell by her face that they'd come up empty again. Around 8 o'clock, Ben's black sedan pulled up to the curb. Gray spotted it immediately and tensed up. She sprinted toward the car, screaming for Ben to run because of the bomb. Ben looked confused as he stepped out, but the driver realized the gig was up and panicked. The driver lunged into the back seat, pulled a gun, and grabbed Ben and his boss. He threatened to kill them both if anyone moved an inch, and Gray froze in her tracks. Security swarmed the area, but they couldn't do anything with a gun pointed at their boss's head. Gray was hysterical, begging the guy not to hurt Ben and offering him whatever amount of money he wanted. The driver just sneered and told her that if she'd do anything, she should start by taking her clothes off right there. Gray didn't even hesitate for long. She didn't care about the humiliation because she knew she could just wipe everyone's memory with a reset. To her, saving Ben was the only thing that mattered. I'd seen this play out so many times before, watching her degrade herself further and further just to keep him alive for a few more minutes. She was stuck in a loop of her own making, convinced that this was the only way. I didn't know if I should be impressed by her dedication or disgusted by how little she valued herself. There's nothing wrong with wanting to save a life, but she was doing it at my expense. She'd spent 1,000 days trying to save Ben while putting me through hell every single time. If she'd just been honest with me from the start, I would have helped her, but she chose to treat me like I was nothing. I finally opened the box I'd brought and walked over to her just as she started to unbutton her shirt. I grabbed her arm and told her to stop. She fought me, screaming that Ben was going to die if she didn't do what the gunman said. I told her calmly that Ben was going to be fine because the gunman was powerless. That set the guy off, and he pulled out the detonator, screaming that he'd blow us all to hell. He roared at me, threatening to trigger the bomb and kill everyone in the vicinity. Gray lost it, screaming that she'd do whatever he wanted as long as he didn't press that button. She tried to tear herself away from me, and when she couldn't, she slapped me hard across the face. My cheek stung, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the coldness in her eyes. I asked her if she really thought I'd just stand there and watch my girlfriend strip for a crowd. She shoved me with everything she had, and I finally let go of her arm. She screamed that we were over and that she could do whatever she wanted with her own body. I just smiled at her and agreed that we were done. She went completely still, the words finally sinking in. I turned my back on her and started taunting the gunman, asking him if he was really brave enough to blow himself up. Ben was losing his mind, begging me to stop before I got everyone killed. I kept pushing him, calling him a coward and a fake. I told him he didn't have the guts to actually go through with it, because he was too afraid to die. He finally snapped and slammed his thumb down on the button. Gray let out a blood-curdling scream, but nothing happened. The silence that followed was deafening as everyone realized the bomb was a dud. He kept clicking the button in a panic, and I just laughed, asking him if he'd ever heard of Signal Jammer. Gray's eyes widened as she finally realized what had been in the box I'd pulled from my car. The guy panicked and shoved the gun against Ben's head, screaming that I couldn't jam a bullet. Gray tried to lunge forward, but I caught her and held her back. She was hitting me and calling me every name in the book, desperate to get to Ben. Then, a single shot echoed through the air, and the gunman slumped to the ground. I let her go, and she flew into Ben's arms, sobbing that she'd finally saved him. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders as the police moved in to secure the scene. A SWAT sniper stepped out from the shadows, lowering his rifle. I tipped off the police hours ago, and once they saw the jammer was working, they took the shot they needed to end it. I watched them cry in each other's arms and felt nothing but relief. I told Gray that we were even now. She saved me from the river, and I saved her friend from the bomb. Our debt was settled, and I was done with her. She pulled away from Ben, her face pale as she asked if I knew. I didn't let her finish her sentence. I just told her I'd been there for all 999 times. I told her I remembered every single second, but that I didn't hate her. I just wanted her to leave me alone. I was done with the loops and the unseasoned noodles. Anyone would have lost their mind after 1,000 days of that. She tried to grab my arm and apologize, but I just shook her off. I told her there was no need for apologies because we were square. She'd saved my life once and taken it 99 times. I told her the apartment was hers and that I'd already moved my stuff out. She started crying, begging me not to leave, and throwing my old promises of marriage and protection back in my face. She accused me of breaking my word, but I just wiped her tears and reminded her that she was the one who officially ended things 10 minutes ago. We were already over. She went quiet, and I noticed for the first time how much she'd aged. The stress of the loops had added years to her face. I told her to stop using her power and to just try and be happy with Ben. I walked away and didn't look back. I had to spend a few hours at the police station explaining how I knew about the bomb and the gunman, but I just gave them a vague story about an anonymous tip. They were suspicious, but since I'd saved lives, they eventually let me go. By the time I walked out of the precinct, it was almost midnight, and I knew I had one last thing to do. I raced over to a small cafe across town, the same one I'd visited during every failed loop. I saw her standing by the fountain, a woman in a white dress named Chloe Bennett. Chloe owned the cafe, and I knew exactly what was about to happen. I lunged forward and pulled her out of the way, just as a heavy ceramic planter shattered on the pavement where she'd been standing a second ago. It was 11:51 p.m., exactly on schedule. In the very first loop, after Gray and I had a massive fight, I'd come here for coffee and watch Chloe die in this exact spot. A neighbor upstairs always knocked it over by accident. Every time the day reset, I made it my mission to save her, and I'd succeeded in almost every loop where Gray hadn't killed me first. Saving her had become a ritual, and she'd always thank me with a cup of coffee and a few minutes of conversation. Those brief moments with her were the only thing that kept me sane during those 1,000 repeats of the same day. She gave me that same grateful smile and offered me a coffee, but I checked my watch and realized we were almost at the midnight mark. I shook my head and told her it wasn't necessary. I told her I'd see her around, mostly because I couldn't stomach another day of noodles and coffee. I was still terrified that Gray might hit the reset button one last time and drag me back to the start of the day. Chloe didn't push it. She just went inside and came back with a cup of juice, telling me it was the last one of the day. I took it, grateful for something that wasn't coffee. I was too nervous to drink, my eyes glued to my watch as the seconds ticked toward midnight. Chloe asked what I was looking at, but I was too focused on the countdown to answer. I didn't know if I could survive another reset. I looked at Chloe and told her that if I saw her again, I'd prefer a Coke. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, which made sense given she had no idea about the loops. She promised to have a cold Coke waiting for me next time, even though they didn't usually stock it. I told her to make sure it had plenty of ice, and just as the words left my mouth, the clock struck 12. My heart was pounding as the seconds ticked past midnight. 1, 2, 3, and nothing changed. Chloe pinched my cheek and asked if I was okay, snapping me out of my trance. The world didn't reset. I was flooded with relief because I knew Gray's power only worked within the span of a single day. Once we hit tomorrow, there was no going back to yesterday. She'd mentioned that limitation once, and since Ben was safe, she had no reason to try and rewind anyway. I finished my juice, savoring the fact that I was finally moving forward in time. I was so happy I grabbed Chloe by the shoulders and laughed, telling her I was never coming back to today again. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care. Chloe was offended, thinking I hated her or her shop, but I quickly apologized and told her it wasn't like that. It was impossible to explain, so I just promised to visit her often, just for anything but coffee. I told her I was just sick of coffee and really wanted that Coke. She finally smiled, but my joy was cut short when I heard Gray's voice behind me, asking to talk. I froze at the sound of her voice and turned to find Gray looking like a complete wreck. I told her flat out that we were done and that she needed to go away. I reminded her that our debt was settled. She was crying, swearing that she loved me and that Ben was just like a brother to her, but I'd heard it all before. I asked her why she never just talked to me about it. I wouldn't have let her friend die, but she didn't trust me enough to even try. After all our years together, she still didn't know who I was. I reminded her that I'd always trusted her, but she'd repaid that trust with abuse and murder. She'd treated me like an obstacle to be removed rather than a partner. She kept sobbing and begging for a second chance, but I just told her to go. I didn't have any forgiveness left to give her. She tried to throw her arms around me, but I stepped back. She kept screaming that I was her only love, but then I felt a hand slip into mine. Chloe stepped up and took my arm, telling Gray that she needed to stop harassing her boyfriend. Gray looked like she'd been slapped before turning her glare on Chloe. Gray asked if this was the girl I'd been saving, accusing me of moving on in a single day. I just nodded, letting her believe Chloe was my new girlfriend if it meant she'd finally leave. I told her that while it was only one day for her, I'd lived through 1,000, and that was more than enough time to fall out of love with her and find someone better. Even if she reset the day now, she'd just be resetting to a time where I was already with Chloe. She let out a chilling laugh that made my skin crawl, telling me I didn't know her at all. She claimed that I belonged to her and that she'd never let me go. She threatened that if she couldn't have me, no one could. She pointed out that while I knew Chloe now, I wouldn't be able to protect her if she went back 5 or 10 years into the past. My heart sank as her expression turned dark. She told me she had one shot to jump to any point in time, though it would cost her dearly, and she was planning to go back a decade to rewrite our history. She threatened to make sure Chloe never met me, or even to kill her before we ever had a chance. I told her she wouldn't dare, but she just laughed and started to glow with a blinding white light. Her hair turned snow white and her skin wrinkled as she aged decades in seconds. I grabbed Chloe and screamed for her to find me at 36 Cherry Street in Charleston if she remembered anything. The light swallowed everything, and when I finally opened my eyes, I was standing in the glow of a setting sun. The world around me was a blur of the familiar and the forgotten. I pulled an old flip phone out of my pocket and felt my heart stop when I saw the date. I was back in high school, 10 years in the past, still wearing my old varsity jacket. Gray had actually done it. She dragged us back a decade to the summer after graduation. It took me a few days to wrap my head around being back in my hometown. I had no way to find Chloe, and I was terrified of what Gray might do to her. Then, I saw an old woman with a cane hobbling toward me, her hair as white as snow. It was Gray, but she looked like she was 80 years old. She wheezed as she asked me if I regretted choosing Chloe over her, gloating that I'd never see the other girl again. I was so angry I wanted to hit her, but she looked so frail that I knew it would kill her. I just told her that she'd finally succeeded in making me hate her, and she collapsed against the wall, dropping her cane. She started crying, saying she only did it because she loved me and promising to take us back if I just love her again. I screamed at her to shut up, my fist trembling just inches from her face. I told her she was lucky she was an old woman, or I wouldn't have held back. She stumbled and started to fall, but someone caught her before she hit the pavement. Gray started to thank her savior, but froze when she saw it was Chloe. I was just as shocked to see her standing there in the past. Chloe helped the old woman up and then turned to me with a smile, telling me that I wasn't the only one who could remember through a time jump. I've never been so happy in my life. I remembered our conversations from the loops, specifically when I told her I was getting tired of coffee and wanted juice instead. She'd remembered everything, just like I did. That was why she'd brought me juice in the final loop. I ran over and pulled her into a massive hug, finally feeling like the nightmare was over. Chloe joked about just graduating high school and asked what my plans were. I laughed and suggested we apply to the same college so we could start our lives over together. We both said it at the same time and couldn't stop laughing. I picked up Gray's cane and handed it back to her as she stood there trembling. I told the old lady she should probably stay indoors more often and thank God that kind young people like us were around to help her. Then I took Chloe's hand, and we ran off into the sunset together. I asked her if she wanted to go on a graduation trip, and she asked where I had in mind. I told her I wanted to visit a certain cafe 10 years in the future, and she said that sounded like a perfect plan.